Stephen McCormick, an experienced truck driver from New Zealand, was working on his truck when a bizarre accident occurred. Positioned between the truck's bumper and the trailer, he slipped and fell onto a brass valve that supplied compressed air to the truck's brakes. The valve punctured his buttocks, forcing pressurized air into his body. Stephen felt an unusual sensation. His body began inflating like a balloon, nearly doubling in size. His colleagues and son rushed to his aid, quickly shutting off the air supply and laying him on the ground. They called for an ambulance, but both emergency vehicles in the area were occupied, forcing Stephen to wait in agony for an hour. At the hospital, doctors recognized the severity of his condition. The pressurized air had separated fat tissue from muscle, filling his abdomen, chest, and even the spaces around his lungs, heart, and behind his eyelids. To help him breathe, doctors inserted a tube through his ribs into his lungs. The trapped air had to be expelled naturally through flatulence, a process that took 3 days. Remarkably, Stephen made a full recovery. Doctors later determined that if the valve had punctured a blood vessel, the injury could have been fatal. Joan Murray, an experienced skydiver with 35 jumps, was preparing for a routine dive when disaster struck. As she plummeted at 120 miles per hour, she attempted to deploy her main parachute, but it failed to open despite multiple tries. She reached for her reserve parachute, which deployed successfully. But another problem arose. She began spinning uncontrollably, causing the parachute cords to tangle into a knot, rendering it useless. Joan crashed into the ground at 80 miles per hour, hearing a loud crack before losing consciousness. She fell into a coma and was rushed to the hospital, where doctors performed complex reconstructive surgeries and blood transfusions. The entire right side of her body was crushed, yet incredibly. 2 weeks later, Joan woke from her coma and made a full recovery. Her survival was due to an extraordinary stroke of luck. She landed directly on a fire ant nest. The disturbed venomous ants swarmed her body, stinging and biting her over 200 times. The fire ant venom, known as solanopsin, stimulated her nervous system, keeping her heart beating until paramedics arrived, ultimately saving her life. Margaret Guire, a young Canadian woman, had just married her husband Herbert in 1915. To celebrate, they boarded the RMS Lusitania in New York City, bound for Liverpool. While enjoying a routine dinner on the ship, they heard a loud boom. The ship had been torpedoed by a German submarine. Herbert quickly escorted Margaret to a lifeboat, where she joined 3 other women and a baby. As she looked up, she saw the ship's massive smokestacks looming above and feared they might collapse onto the lifeboat. In a moment of panic, she climbed back to the deck. Herbert, believing she was safe, boarded another lifeboat. As the Lusitania sank rapidly, Margaret tried to swim away from the wreckage, but was caught in a whirlpool formed by the submerging ship. The current pulled her and 2 other men into one of the smokestacks. Miraculously, a sudden explosion from below blasted her back to the surface, where a nearby lifeboat spotted and rescued her. As she looked around, she saw Herbert in another lifeboat, crying, believing she had died. Against all odds, both survived the tragedy. Julie Murley and Liz Cottrell were kayaking in San Luis Obispo, California, drawn by a spectacular event. Humpback whales feeding on fish in the bay. Tourists in boats and kayaks watched the scene, but whale watching requires strict safety precautions. Experts recommend staying at least 300 feet from the feeding zone to avoid dangerous encounters. Unfortunately, Julie and Liz misjudged the distance. A tightly packed swarm of fish, known as a bait ball, moved alarmingly close to them, catching the attention of a humpback whale. Before they could react, the whale lunged forward to swallow the fish, scooping up Julie and Liz in the process. Trapped inside its massive mouth, they likely feared being swallowed whole. Humpback whales can grow up to 56 feet long, but their throats are only about the size of a human fist, capable of stretching to just 15 inches in diameter. They also lack teeth, meaning the women were not crushed. A whale's natural instinct is to spit out anything that isn't fish. And moments later, Julie and Liz were ejected from the whale's mouth, surfacing unharmed. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe, like, and share for similar content.